That's a very big question, and I think when we say African realities, maybe we'll say the different realities in African countries. We have to look at how the media in these countries in Southern Europe or in Spain, how do they acquire their news? Every day they are informed by big agencies, and these big agencies have one journalist informing millions of viewers or readers around the world. So somehow the people in a country like Spain are seeing a country, Uganda, through the lens of one journalist who happens to be maybe from another foreign country. So the realities are still yet to be. I think we are far away from that proper, portrayal of the complex story of different African countries. And it has to start with knowing that different African countries, the 54 countries in Africa, are different. They are unique, and they might have similarities, but they are really different. And when you approach your story like that, you don't, then you shed off all the stereotypes that you have about Africa being one place and having all these characteristics. So I think it's important that the media goes out of its way to get their own reporters to report the story, but also to work closely with, of course, we have journalists on the ground in our countries who know the context really well. So it's not just somebody coming from somewhere and dropping in a country and covering a story, but making sure that you have the right contacts, you have the journalists on the ground informing you. So that's the only way you're going to capture the complex story of every day in Africa. I think that very few editors probably in these countries have ever been to Africa. So how do you practice the gatekeeper role when you yourself are limited in understanding the continent? They have to be able to, they might not have to have come here, but endeavor to read, endeavor to make many contacts. We live in the social media age. Can you really get out of your way to make a contacts list of maybe top journalists from the particular country of interest? And once you receive a story from that place, can you test it? Can you ask them, what do you think of this? What do you think of this narrative? It's important that the people who are covering stories on a daily basis, who are very well familiar with this story, are able to have a voice and also to help you understand the complex stories we are talking about. So the gatekeeper role of editors in these countries, I think it still has a long way to go, because the editors themselves, I don't think that they are well informed about the continent. I think that when you talk about citizenship, it's a very fluid right now, term, because people can be Ugandan and at the same time belong to another, country in the world. So, but because people have been able to move, so we have seen people challenge these realities. Citizenship also has worked in a way that more and more people in African countries have access to the internet. And unlike before, where a newspaper would actually carry a story and no one will ever read it, right now, if you put a story, whether it's in Spain, whether it's in France, in a few, just there and then we will have read it. And the people, there are translation tools, where you don't speak the language. So people immediately can read the story and know what you're talking about, and they can be able to respond to you in real time, unlike before, where people could just come to African countries and do stories, and Africans were not part of the audience. So whoever is writing stories has to be aware that people are more engaged, people are reading the story. So you're not only writing to the Spanish audience, you're writing for the audience out there. So it's important to get your facts right and to get the context and to actually make sure that you understand the sensibilities that underlie certain stories in different countries. I already addressed that we have seen important trends come up. We saw a couple of times CNN got stories wrong about Kenya when Obama was coming to visit Kenya, and we had a headline say Kenya is a hotbed of terror. And that's not true. So Kenyans went online and protested that, and I think big officials from CNN had to come to Kenya and apologize because this was intended to show Kenya as a country in bad light. So people are able to actually take control now more than ever. They can respond to you. You do not own their narrative. They say, we are here, we are audience, and we will take part in this whole storytelling. You're not the only monopoly of our story. We are here, we'll talk back at you if you have done any story in where we think it does not play fair or is not really objective. The feedback mechanisms have improved between people on the continent and other countries where these stories are being shared. I think you don't create narratives. I think it's important to let people tell their story. Most often we see people come do stories, they try so hard to describe people, but why don't you let people describe themselves? Why don't you ask a person in that country, how would you describe this situation, instead of you coming with because all of us, prejudices and stereotypes exist, but it's our responsibility as people in the information business and the news to actually overcome these prejudices and be able to tell a better story. So I think it's very important to work with civil society, have a contact list, like I said, of journalists, civil society members. When there's a story, can you ask them, when you write a story, when you have an angle, can you actually test it out and say, what would you think of this? Of course, that's a dialogue. You have to have a dialogue. You can't cover a place, you can't talk about a place without its people taking part in this kind of, it's a dialogue. It's not just you coming here or picking a story off the wires and, basically just purvey whatever you pick online. It's important that you have good contacts of people in each country to inform you and also make you learn things that you wouldn't have learned from just reading, I think, general stories from other countries in the West. So it's important that you have people on the ground whom you can learn from. And I think you can do a lot better when you know the context through the people who live this life every day. And the life is not bad. It's not always bad. People have fun, people have different, like I said, the story is complex. The story is as complex as any other story in Spain or in any other part of the world. It's not special. So always remind yourself that it's not special. It's like any other country, it's like any other family. So be able to tell their positive story and their negative story, but remember that it's a story as a whole. The story has different facets.